incredibly new news, and it's mind-blowing.
So, and they're like, when can we start? And I'm like, well, I need to talk to the town and make sure they're not getting frustrated. So I said, let me talk to them on Monday, maybe middle of the week. But so literally they're talking about big truck, all the stuff, come up. And I was like, so you've hired locals? And I said, we're going to try to, but we may be parking the cars, not Amazon cars, they're just going to be regular. We might, I'll work with you, we might reserve, like, and they don't want to say Amazon because they don't want people to like break in thinking, oh, did they leave a package in there or something? And they said they'll either, say, okay, that car's going to Orcas, that car's going, depending on the packages. But they're really excited.
So one question there would be making sure that they've gone backwards a little bit and talked to Aeronautical Services, which is our UPS provider who was previously doing all the because they may be the local contact. So they might be the most likely to be able to get drivers and that whole process done. I know Amazon's thinking in the Amazon world. When you get to the island world, they may honestly find that if they go, it could still be through the Amazon process, but partnering with Aeronautical Services to do that. Because Aeronautical Services is going to have the yard, the facility, they have their own parking.
And their yard is right adjacent to Lot C.
Yeah. And on Orcas, they have a whole facility.
It was actually interesting. They flew people out from the East Coast. I took them on a ferry, showed them like how things load and unload, because they were just like, what? And because the local guy was like, and so they're doing this for Vashon too. It's the San Juans and Vashon that they're figuring out.
I would really encourage them to get their heads together with Aeronautical, because it has the vehicle infrastructure, and if Amazon's going to give them, maybe if Amazon's wanting to put vehicle infrastructure there, they might be willing to be part of that. They have the sorting space, they have the parking space, they have all that stuff sitting there on all three islands.
I would assume the organization they have. Oh yeah, but I'll check when I call them and tell them it's okay.
I mean, I would. It's just a staff, and honestly, they weren't in the loop when Amazon made the switch from UPS to and so they were all staffed up, and then all of a sudden they lost. They had nothing to do with it.
That's what I was worried about. Those are the things I was worried that, like, there's a system, right? And all of a sudden they're changing it, and I don't know how much communication they've done with.
Well, there was zero communication when they went to the postal service. They had no idea.
It must have been terrible.
We do. John, long time no see. Met twice in Mukilteo in 1 week. Oh, were you in this room too? Yeah, that's great. I love the views. And
organizing this.
You take all of it, I'm here in
so what are we going to do about that?
Great.
Nice.
This morning, there was already activity going on with the double glass wall thing. Somebody really did design because I don't believe it's stuff here, people here, great field. Too bad about the field as we started.
Oh, really? Yeah.
With the old school building. So the question was, do we kind of I wanted to set that measure for people to vote on it. Because it had been very, you can imagine these small towns, very controversial. So the voters voted to build it.
Well, they did a good job with design. Yeah.
I'm reading your text now. I just
How you doing? Good to see you.
Hi, welcome. Good to see you. Thank you. Thank you.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, have a seat. I think we're gonna have you guys seated, and then yeah.
He didn't lose a tail, he has no tail.
Hey, Carrie. Good to see you.
Okay, I'll smile. That's your Pixar. There you go. I'm trying to guess this in.
It's easy, you know it.
Gosh, I am guessing everything.
It's nice to meet you. Capybara.
Oh, capybara! Who doesn't love a capybara? I've seen one in real life. I've actually seen one.
Oh, you've seen one. I know. We're still seeing the longest FAC in the lab.
well, they did.
We've got some good experience. Happy to speak a little bit to the stories. Yeah, maybe. Oh, sure. And if they don't see it, she's a classic example of they're all showered and
There it is, yeah.
Yeah, and she's awesome.
Yeah, her and I go back.
Just in us.
Oh, that's really nice.
So I ran into him on the ferry. They going in and saying,
She was, and then she works on two by fours on her shoulder. Next thing you know, I got guys carrying 22 by fours because they're not going to be out there.
Hey everyone, I think we're gonna get ready to start.
All right.
If you want to take a seat, you can sit at a table, and we'll ask you up later. Yeah. Oh, and we'll have you guys sit towards the end.
Did you just come down?
I came to Birmingham.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to. We're gonna go ahead and call it the first Fix Our Ferries Summit. I think. Does anyone have a memory from the Wayback Machine? Have we done this before? Like in the 80s, was there some kind of like radical
They did it in
gathering?
the 80s, but there was a disco ball.
There was okay. Sorry, next time for sure. We'll bring it back. Hi, welcome. I know folks traveled from a long way away, right? So planes, ships, staying overnight. Super appreciate it. I'm Amy. I'm with Islanders for Ferry Action and the Fix Our Ferries group, which of course encompasses the San Juans, Flow, and Community Water Taxi. Thank you. Right. And we have a great cohort from Bremerton here, Bremerton Ferry Coalition. Fantastic. And I super want to thank our Islanders for Ferry Action volunteers, Wendy Alman, Beth, Lindsay, and Rick Wallace. Thank you. And like an enormous amount of work just to bring this together. But and I know that all of you as community volunteers have done an enormous amount of work, but I really want to thank our steering committee. So welcome, welcome, welcome. Of course, the what of being here today, the reason for being here today is to talk about how we can come together in our communities and work together with our legislators and with our communities to really make sure that we are getting Washington State Ferries the funding that they need to do the work that they need to do to get us where we need to go every day during the legislative session. And of course, that encompasses work that you can do in your communities, but also, how do we speak with a regional voice? We know there's going to be a lot of competition for resources this session, so we want to make sure that we are getting WSF the funding they need to fulfill our 3 core priorities, of course, which are making sure that we are building all of the boats that we need to build, making sure that crews are paid equitable wages, and also making sure that we have great transparency and accountability so that our communities have all the information they need to organize and to ride the ferry successfully every day. Which, how many people rode a ferry today? Or yesterday? Within the last 24 hours. All right, yes, all right. So that's kind of the what, but the why we're here is because every single one of you took the day today to come and be here together in community. And that, time is the most sort of precious resource we have. And all of you took a lot of time, right? When you think about the weekend, right, and all of the places you could be and what you could be doing with family and friends, you took today to come here. And to work on the boats and to get us where we need to go, and that's an incredible gift to your communities. So really want to thank you for that and just acknowledge that, and of course acknowledge our legislators who are rolling up their sleeves and about to get in it, right? You're about to get down and dirty in session. So thank you so much for coming today as well and for giving your time and listening to us. And we really want to forge really good connections with our communities and with you so that we can help you, help us help you. Is that right? Yeah. All right, a couple housekeeping notes. Restroom is right around the corner. Water stations are right around the corner. There's some cups if you need a cup for water. Lunch will be delivered around noon. We will have a break if you do need to run and get something, but then we will hear from Peter Phillips, who will talk to us about the future of marine transit a little bit and some marine transit alternatives, because we know we want to get people off the boats as much as we can and out of their cars as much as we can and keep Pacific Northwest green. So we'll talk about some foot ferry stuff and what we can do with the mosquito fleet and some of our alternative solutions. And then in the afternoon, we'll do some sort of guided breakouts, and we'll talk about what does session look like among the Fix Our Ferries communities, and are there other communities that we can bring in, right? Can we bring in Whidbey Island to this conversation? Can we bring in, can we get Port Townsend in? But really talk about what we can do in our communities during session, and then what can we do together, right? Let's pick a lobby day where we can all do one big lobby day together. And then we'll talk, we'll do a little bit of a media workshop, a kind of grassroots goals and media. We have a little handout, and we'll get you into breakouts and just talk about, okay, what is your message, right? What is it that you're gonna try to communicate to folks in January, February, March as it's going on? How are you gonna do that? And that's kind of where we see the strength of the coalition, right? Is that we're all gonna help each other out and that stuff. So that's what the day looks like. And then we're all gonna leave what was on the website, engaged and connected and ready for community. So without further ado, Rick Wallace, I don't even know how to introduce you, Rick. Rick is amazing. Rick was a former journalist and now does about 5 different things on Vashon and is now gonna moderate our panel. So thank you, and everyone please round of applause. And away we will go.
It's always a complete drag to follow Amy because she's so sharp and so well spoken. So I'll aspire to achieve her level. Our hope for today is that we will all be talking together by the end of the day. And if you look at the agenda, it sort of builds concentrically outward. So we have legislators, stakeholders, then folks from communities who are thinking about what they can do to help make stuff happen. About ferries. There's ways to make stuff happen that don't involve ferries, but it's hard to think of them if you live where we all live. Hi. So that we said in a note to the legislators, to the panelists, you don't need to prepare slides or fix presentations or anything like that because it's a workshop. That's what we're trying to do here. So, let's just quickly have you say your names and your districts that you represent, and then I'll ask the first question. Please, Emily.
Hi, Emily Alvarado, State Representative in the 34th, which includes Vashon, also parts of Seattle, Burien, White Center.
And Mark Elias is State Senator from the district you're sitting in right now, so welcome to the 21st District here in South Snohomish County. I also chair our Senate Transportation Committee.
Greg.
Good morning. Greg Nance, proudly represent Kitsap, the 23rd Legislative District, which encompasses Kingston, Bainbridge, and Bremerton.
Clyde Shavers from the 10th, so all Island counties of Whidbey and Camino and parts of Skagit and Snohomish.
Oddly enough, you all have to deal with ferries. Gosh, I wonder why you were invited today. Okay, well, let's start with the temperature taking, if we can. Just each of you give us some brief sense of where you personally think things sit in terms of funding. So we have two things that have happened in the last several weeks. One is that 2117 did not pass, therefore that may be But in the last, and I remember vividly having a Zoom with you, Senator, where you were attempting to set our expectations and dreams about funding. But at the same time, we have the governor saying words like $10 billion shortfall. So that didn't sound too good. So if we could just go down the line, Emily, if you'd start and give us your sense of how much of a challenge do we have? Because not much happens without money.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like I sat in the wrong seat. I should have let Senator Leah sit right here as the chair.
Oh, we did alphabetical order. You're right.
We organized ourselves. Well, I'll just say, obviously, it's going to be a challenging session. We do have a significant budget shortfall in the operating budget and the transportation budget, which I'll let the Senator talk about. And what I'm focused on is that we're gonna need to come together and have community really aligned around a vision of identifying new revenue to bring in so that we can invest in the critical services that our communities need. So I know that I will personally be a champion for a range of revenue options because we're not going to be able to cut our way towards either fixing our ferries, cut our way towards solving challenges in our public schools, cut our way to even a maintenance budget. We can't do that. So a big focus for me, and I think for others, especially as someone who doesn't sit on appropriations or on transportation, is to think about how I can be a voice bringing coalitions together to support the kind of revenue that we're going to need. And just to say it explicitly, revenue is taxes. That's what we're going to need to bring in the money that our communities need.
Senator?
It's a great start, thank you. I want to introduce two amazing leaders that are here. The Senior Director of External Relations at WSF is here, so thank you, John Vazino. Will you stand up so everybody can see you?
I don't want to be in line with Sean.
Thank you, John. And Commissioner St. Clair from Island County just came in. Janet, it's so good to see you. Thanks for being here. Again, welcome to Mukilteo. When you get a chance, you can go check out the world's most beautiful ferry terminal, just right over here. I fought hard to get the solar panels on the roof. It's a net zero facility that I think will sort of send a message about the future of our ferry system. And the reason I like this terminal is because it's deeply rooted in sustainability and the idea that we need to be thinking about the future, not just the present. And as we think about our ferry system, that's the challenge we're sitting in right now. Over the last 3 years, thanks to Move Ahead Washington, we've made dramatic transformational investments to change the way that ferries are operating. Over $30 million a year in investments into workforce development pathways, extra crewing, the support. So now our missed sailings from crewing are down 80–90% because of these investments that we've made. We also have charted a path forward to buy the new transformational electric boats that are going to give us great service but reduce our environmental impact on vulnerable communities. So we are in this moment where we can see the future that we would like to get to, but as Representative Alvarado said, we face tremendous pressure to sustain these investments, and absent new resources, there is not sustainable funding to continue the crewing investments we've made and the vision that we're trying to achieve in ferries. So in transportation, in this next 2-year budget, our current projection is something on the order of a $200 million deficit. In the next biennium, which would be the 27-29 biennium, over $1 billion deficit projected in the transportation budget, because costs have gone up. Mostly on our projects, but just costs in general have gone up in this economy. And our largest revenue source is the gas tax, which is declining. As thankfully we're driving more efficient vehicles and electric vehicles, it does mean that our revenue source is now beginning to go down. So we have a structural problem right as we're beginning to see like the tiniest green sprouts of progress. We can point just in 3 years to say, look what happens when we invest deeply in our workforce. Look what happens when we crew above Coast Guard minimums, what that means. Look what happens when we buy new service planners and buy program delivery folks in WSF that can deliver these new initiatives for us. We can see that this is working. We just don't have the sustainable funding to continue it. So we're gonna, as Rep. Alvarado talked about, gonna have to talk about more revenue, which means taxes. And I know all of us share the perception or the belief too that our current tax structure is unbalanced and unfair. So as we ask people to pay more, we need to be really careful about who we're asking to pay more. And in Washington State, those that are the richest in our communities contribute the smallest share of their income to state taxes. Those who are the least well off, unfortunately, are contributing the most. And analysis shows we are the 49th most unfair tax system in the United States. We were 50th a few years ago. We let Florida get ahead of us, but we are still 49th. Yeah, exactly. They're worse than us. So we have to think about how do we come up with resources to support this? How do we be as sustainable as the ferry terminal here in Mukilteo is, and how do we do it in a way that's fair and equitable?
Representative Nance.
Yeah, always a mistake following Senator Leas. We're facing significant fiscal headwinds. Representative Alvarado, Senator Leas said that quite well. This is going to be a cycle of belt tightening in certain respects, where we simplify and streamline, look for efficiencies. And I think a lot of our investments in ferries actually speak to those efficiencies. An example of this, we've let maintenance and preservation within the WSF network fall behind. We haven't kept up with the demands of keeping our fleet in top readiness. And the result of falling $250 million behind on maintenance and preservation is more of our boats are being pulled out of the fleet for unscheduled maintenance and for disruptions that affect all of our communities across. And so more proactive, getting upstream to take better care of the boats we do have, while doing everything we can to rush the procurement of our new vessels. On the campaign trail and community, we're hearing the pain of neighbors, of what happens when boats are canceled or when crews aren't able to show up for their shift. We've got to do more to alleviate the pain that our neighbors are feeling, and that's really what I view as a core role in the legislature. And so thinking outside the box for how do we get solutions on the water. I'm really excited to hear from Peter Phillips this afternoon, where we think more broadly than our auto ferry network. I can speak firsthand in Kitsap just how important our fast ferries have been to help our families in Kingston and Bremerton communities get to work, get to the doctor, get to studies, get to the airport. That is vital. It's been an enormous supplement to help us ease the pain that we're experiencing in Kitsap. And my belief is that everyone across the state should have that relief. We can't wait 5+ years for new boats to roll off the line. We need action sooner. And so I think a mosquito fleet reauthorization in 2025 can be dollars very well spent. And as I speak to leaders in our community, This is one way that we can think outside the box and accelerate.
So, thank you. So I don't think I need to reiterate the challenges we'll have on the funding side. I think everyone kind of covered that. So I share in the concern with our funding for the coming session. However, I'm focusing for this coming session on workforce. So I'm the vice chair for the House Education Committee, so anything kindergarten through 12th grade. And we're looking at how do we expand on the CTE, the Career Technical Education program that exists in our schools. Last session we were looking at healthcare curriculum, healthcare roles, understanding that there is a lack of workforce in long-term care with home care and caregivers. How do we look at medical assistants and nurses, and how do we fill those roles in behavioral and mental health support as well? And so we were very glad to have passed our bill that really focused on that and provided that healthcare curriculum into our high schools. So now, currently, we are focusing on how do we ensure that we can develop a new generation of really excited young people to serve in the maritime industry, to serve in the ferry workforce. And so we're working on a bill right now that emulates what we did with the healthcare curriculum, the healthcare system, and provides that support in our schools with our ferries. We understand that there has been a significant turnover of folks who have been serving in the ferry workforce. Some of them are still serving right now and who are much older, who have concerns of who are going to fill the gaps in our ferry system, right? And so while we should be focusing, of course, on the environmental protection efforts that we have in this ecosystem of the ferry system, we should also be focusing on workforce as well. And so that's what I'll be focusing on with my wonderful chair on the Education Committee, and also the chair on the Senate side as well, to see how do we develop a future where young people are excited to serve and knowledgeable and can be certified early on, so they're encouraged to be part of this ferry workforce.
Thanks. Let me just take a moment and point out that we have live note-taking going on. Thanks to colleague Beth Lindsay. Thank you, Beth. Also, on your tables, you have a sheet of paper, actually many sheets of paper, but only one you need to look at. And there's some questions on there that if you would respond to them, it's sort of dreams and wishes and aspirational. But once you fill these out, you don't need to be like super long. I'm going to use them like a crib sheet maybe today. Turn it over. So I spent a lot of time doing volunteer emergency management. This is FEMA Form 1, a blank piece of paper. There are a lot of forms with FEMA. This is Form 1 because you can accomplish a lot with a blank piece of paper. What we'd like you to do is, just for fun, please, give us a Washington State Ferries related trivia question. And we'll collect these in about 10 or 15 minutes or something like that. Okay? Thank you. Okay, so we've heard about the challenges of funding. Let's say that you scrape together, somebody walks the ferry line with a coffee can and gets it full, and you find this funding or you find efficiencies. What mechanisms do you have and I'm going to start down at the other end, it's only fair, right? What mechanisms do you have to make sure that the money that you allocate is being spent best as it possibly can? There's a long history with Washington State Ferries, cultural stuff. How do you really know, Representative Shavers, that the money is going to go to what you thought it was going to go for? What's the accountability cycle for you?
Yeah. So I think,
excuse me, not just what it is now, but what you'd like it to be going forward.
It's a more complicated question than I think most of us can recognize. I think first, what I'll say is relationships with the legislature is quite important. And when I say it's important, it's critical in ensuring that the vision that we all share is being brought forward and executed within the legislature. So for example, I worked with Representative Jake Fye quite closely, who's a chair of Transport on the House side. And thankfully, my seatmate, Representative Dave Paul, is a vice chair of transportation as well. So I have that direct communication link The ability to actually grab coffee with Dave Paul in my own district and say, this is what I'm hearing from my constituents, from our constituents, and I believe that this is something we should be moving forward with. And so, for example, I'm very proud to say that not only are we looking at short-term, can we fix we need to fix the ferry system, but we are looking at long-term as well. And those long-term goals include environmental protection initiatives, or those goals, right? I understand that, it hurts now, but we also want to make sure that our ferries last for decades. And in that endeavor, how do we ensure that we can tap into the technologies that are more environmentally friendly, for example? How do we tap into the structural technologies that allow our ferries to continue to operate for generations to come? And so within the Transportation Committee, within our colleagues and our caucus, I believe that's what we're looking at, that kind of those different avenues towards ensuring our ferry system is robust into the future. I think second, it also requires the legislature and other agencies, including WashDOT or WSF, to actually work together quite closely. And it's not just a push and a pull where the legislature is pushing onto the different agencies. It requires WSF, for example, to actually provide that data, provide that guidance to the legislature, because our voice, while it's important, your voices on the ground talking to those folks who are actually in the engine room or who are actually operating the ferry system is even more important. And that's how all of us, that's why we're here, so we can listen to those who actually have experience on the ferries. I mean, that's equally important with my first point. And I think third, the legislature has in the past and continues to try to provide those, I wouldn't say guardrails, but to provide those bodies, for example, commissions, for example, that ensure accountability on how our ferry system money, or the money afforded to the ferry system, is being appropriately used. Now, it's a very contentious conversation, obviously, because just the ferry system itself, and how we should fund it or where the money should go, is contentious in itself. But it is something that the legislature is committed to do to ensure that accountability is number one. How are our dollars being used?
Representative Nance?
Yeah, I think we can work stronger together to boost transparency, boost accountability, boost visibility. Too often I think we're kind of talking past each other, or there's a perception that WSF and others are communicating clearly, and then a lot of neighbors actually are kind of feeling in the dark. So we need to do more to align on communications. And some of this is just getting back to basics here. A performance dashboard with crystal clear metrics of what is success, and then agreeing on definitions of what is on time, what does a cancellation entail, and just so we have a clear picture of what exactly we're optimizing for. And then we can hold operators accountable when we're not reaching the standard we need. A road map that's crystal clear about the steps ahead. Many of us in this room have read WSF's long-term plans and a 20-year game plan. It's actually a very, very helpful document. I would love to crystallize this into little tabletops and one-pagers that are conveniently available on ferries so that commuters can actually read the crystallized version, have a link to the full report if they so wish to read it, and really take our communication to the next level. We can do simple things like continuing funding for display TVs in our terminals, so that if you've been to an airport or a train station, the first thing you see are when arrivals and when the departures are. And yet at a lot of terminals, if you don't have the WSF or WashDOT app, you don't know where your boat is or when it next leaves. We can do a lot of those little things a little simpler. And then back to basics as well, where I'm the newest member of the House of Representatives, probably the reason why I'm wearing a tie up here. And I'm a little bit old school, so the last session held a number of Fix Our Ferries town halls, and really, really useful just getting ideas directly from our neighbors. We, across 7 of those, heard a ton of good ideas, and that's how we helped build some alignment on the House Transportation Committee to get funding for our King County water taxi with Representative Alvarado, and then Kitsap Transit's fast ferries, because we need more relief sooner. And directly hearing from neighbors affected is much more powerful than hearing from the freshmen in the legislature. So that is our approach going forward, and really back to basics, align, and ensure that we're then delivering.
So I'll tell us a quick story. King County Executive Ron Sims, can anybody remember that far back? Would always, when he was getting on the ferry to Vashon, Abe had a hanger with a pair of jeans. and he changed into jeans on the ferry before he came to that. So, a little clue. So, Senator, let's keep going.
No, this is helpful. I appreciate the thoughts and ideas from my colleagues. I think the first thing I would say, and I appreciate so many of your work to emphasize this point in your communities, the accountability for the performance or currently lack of performance of our ferry system lies with the governor and the legislature. It is not the responsibility of the deck crews, the folks that are at our terminals. They are not making decisions about the funding levels or crewing levels. So I appreciate, I forget the catchy phrase, don't bark on the pier, or whatever this, don't squawk on the dock. I knew it rhymed. I mean, I think that first of all is like the first message. John Vizina is not responsible for the funding levels of Washington State Ferries. He's responsible for delivering on what we give him, and if we give him and the team too little, then our ferry system is stuck trying to manage that. So accountability lies with the legislature, accountability lies with the governor appropriately. And unfortunately, in the case of ferries, where we're in a multi-decade disinvestment process, the real responsibility lies with my predecessor as chair 2 chairs ago that made deep cuts to our ferry system. And we are still trying to play catch up from that. So that, I think, is a context, you know, as Kamala reminds us, we didn't fall out of a coconut tree. There's a context we're living in right now. And the context is a generation of disinvestment that we are now trying to reverse. So what can we do to ensure as we're making these new investments that we're accountable? That's an incredibly important question. And I'll tell you a few of the things that the legislature has done to give us feedback both from the agency and from outside experts. Outside of legislative session, we're special in transportation that we have a joint transportation committee where House and Senate transportation leaders work throughout the rest of the year. Most of our committees in the legislature, after session ends, they kind of go away and they collect information independently, and then we come back in session. Our joint transportation committee continues to meet, continues to work on these issues. And over the course of the last 5 years, we've commissioned external independent reviews of ferry workforce as well as the procurement process for new vessels. The independent review of vessels has come through 2 channels, through our own independent consultant, and we asked the Joint Legislative Audit Committee to also make recommendations on procurement. So we're trying to collect external perspectives to make sure that what we're hearing from our state agency leaders is, you know, agreed to by folks that work in the maritime industry. Those reports have been really valuable, and in fact, on procurement issues, we've retained the consultant that we use to provide continuing, ongoing review of ferry procurement as we try to get these new vessels. So the Joint Transportation Committee gets regular reports on how the procurement process is going and how does the work that Ferries is doing align to international maritime procurement best practices to make sure that we are, you know, trust but verify, as President Reagan said, taking the words that our agency and the advice they're giving us and just checking it with external experts. We also, as leaders, have an obligation to get out there and sort of manage by walking around, visit our terminals. I hadn't been to Anacortes in a very, very long time. So I will tell you, Anacortes needs more than TV screens at their terminal. When I was in the terminal staff's office, and you can listen and smell the men's restroom from their office, I'm like, how are we going to recruit world-class folks to come run this terminal if they are experiencing that? I also had a chance, I'd never visited Eagle Harbor. I'm a transportation nerd, so the chance to go walk around Eagle Harbor was like highlight of that year as chair of the committee. And there I learned we only had 1 shift of workers that were maintaining our boats. And the crews there said, if we could have a swing shift here, a second shift, we could do a lot more. We could make sure that when boats come in, we get them back out quicker. If there's an emergency somewhere in the fleet, we'd have extra crews to send out to deal with that. So when we got to the next session, the Ferries had suggested a swing shift. Governor Inslee had chosen not to include it in his budget. We did, because we had a chance to take that tour and hear from those workers on the ground, hear how the experience was going. We made that decision to make that investment. So today we're almost staffed up. We started hiring those new maintenance workers. We're almost staffed up on that swing shift. So there's more people behind the scenes, these are things that you and others driving on our and using our boats aren't going to see. You're not going to see those extra maintenance workers at Eagle Harbor, but they're there turning boats around faster. So when we have these emergency issues, we can get the boat back into service as quickly as possible. And when a boat far away breaks down, we don't have to wait an interminable period. We can send a crew up there to start working on it. These are some of the little ideas that turn into big ideas that come from that. And then I will say, as chair of the committee, I feel an extra responsibility to my colleagues in the Senate to be actively managing both accountability and results, more than I think other members of the legislature may feel that pressure. So I meet with the director of our state ferries monthly, and we talk through all of the issues that we're working on. How are we doing on workforce? How many missed sailings do we have this month, and what are the causes of them? How are we doing on procurement? How are we doing on the sort of creature comforts of our ferry service? What are we doing to get better signage and better ADA accessibility? What are we doing to get better Wi-Fi on our boats so that folks can access that as they're commuting? So those are some of the ways that I'm leaning in and engaging. I think there's more work to do. I like the idea of a public dashboard with data and accountability that's more visible. I also think we should celebrate. I asked John, we should get a counter to count the fuel savings from as we bring these new hybrid vessels in. I want the public to see avoided emissions and saved diesel costs as we put our new electric boats into service. We shouldn't just measure the things that we're not doing well on. We should also take credit for the investments we're making that are making our communities better. So those are some of the ideas, but I love the Q&A questions. Hopefully we'll get even more ideas for accountability.
We'll bundle all of that up for you.
I appreciate that.
In addition to maybe talking about a little bit of it today. Your turn.
Fabulous points already made. A few things to comment on and then some to reiterate is, one, I know that I hear a lot that there feels like a discrepancy between how things are reported and its performance versus how it feels on the ground. And I just think it's important to acknowledge that. It's like the whole discussion with the economy right now. Large-scale economic indicators can look good, and it still costs a lot to go to the grocery store. And I think we need to bridge that gap and recognize that it's hard when you're on the ground and you can't get where you need to go, and you can't plan for your everyday activities. And I think we need to enhance and make investments and supports in the kinds of communications that are going to make it feel more clear between people on the ground who are trying to use the ferry system and those at the State Department and those of us in government. So I think that's important, both to acknowledge that it feels different and to say how can we invest in communications and transparency to help bridge that gap. Two, I'm really interested to see what we can do under this new governor and administration. And although we're in the legislature, we do have a new governor for the first time in many years, one who ran in the campaign trail talking a lot about recognizing the deficiencies in the ferry system and what we need to do. So we'll see what it looks like as part of organization or management or structure to help lift up these issues. And I look forward to working with the governor and the governor's office to help bring the voice from the legislature to keep accountability to the promises and discussions that were made as part of the campaign trail. The third thing I'd say is just really echoing that we make the decisions around the budget. And I'm really proud of Vashon and folks. Amy, you've been incredible at helping to stop the anger and the meanness towards frontline service, ferry service workers. It doesn't help us create the workforce that we need. I welcome the angry emails. I get them. I welcome them. It's my responsibility to come out to community and hear what we should be doing better, how it feels on the ground. But we have to lift up the workforce right now. We're going to need to make investments. We're going to need to attract high quality people. We're going to need people to want to stay in those very difficult jobs. And that begins with us not taking out the accountability on those workers. So you all, I know in this room, have done a good job at carrying that message forward, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Let's particularly note that the folks from Bremerton, who are you? I've never met you, sorry. How often is it that you do your ferry appreciation thing?
That's awesome.
And it's
awesome.
ferry workers appreciation.
Right, we go and we ride with them on a round trip from Bremerton to Seattle, and we tell them how much we appreciate them. We carry signs so that everybody can see very visibly. We bring snacks for them. So we have these zines that we created.
Sometimes.
Yeah,
we had a local bakery give us 24 donuts to give to the workers. And we've been trying to involve more local businesses to offer, like, we had one business, a food restaurant that offered 50% off of, it's like fried food. So they offered 50% off for ferry workers for the month of September. And so we're trying to increase our capacity to offer more opportunities for those types of partnerships to show how valuable the workers are to the community and how much the community also appreciates the workers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the gaps that you mentioned. And it's actually one of the question areas that we gave you in the briefing note we sent before this session. Sorry, John, I'm going to poke at you a little bit. So we hear about 96% or in that neighborhood on-time performance, stuff like that. I think there are a lot of people out there that would have a little trouble with that statistic because it's not their lived experience. So, Representative Nance, maybe you could start out this little piece of our discussion and talk about that difference between lived experience and what's being reported. You mentioned the dashboard, expand this out a little bit if you will.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that we're dealing with is WSF operated at such a high level for so long. We became accustomed to a very high level of service. My dad commuted 5 days a week for 32 years. He could count on one hand the number of cancellations over 32 years. Now you can count on one hand over a bad weekend of the number of cancellations. And so given the previously outstanding service quality and reliability, we're not there yet. And we're working to get back, and folks compare where we are today to back then. With that, I really appreciate Senator Elias's comment that ultimately accountability rests with the legislature and the governor. And too often we take it out on our crew, too often we take it out on senior WSF staff, which is working around the clock trying to get this right, but hasn't had the resources for 25 years. And so we need to call a spade there. Even by making the right investments now, relief is still years away. And I talked to my friends in Bremerton where we're expected just to put up with one boat service for 7 or 8 years, and that's devastating to our community. We can't just accept that. Our neighbors are missing work, they're being fired from their jobs. We can't stand for that. We have to work to remedy that. And part of what I think where a lot of the frustration comes in is we sometimes don't feel like we're being heard, where the powers that be in Olympia tell us it's not a crisis, this will be fixed soon. And that is not our experience. When you have a neighbor who has to move away because they lost their job and they're not able to stay up with their mortgage, that feels, we deeply feel that. And we've got to do better. And that is the place where we want to just feel that the folks in Olympia care about us. The folks in Olympia are actually pushing for us. And that's why I'm so heartened to be in this room, because for too often we felt like we're all alone down in Bremerton or on Bainbridge or in Kingston, and we're not. We're actually much, much stronger together, and that is a very heartening element here of all of our community leaders across the Sound coming together. And the more that we make this not only a region-wide but a statewide solution, the better off we're going to be. And that's part of where, when I think about the possibilities in front of us, I get so excited, because we have a maritime heritage across Puget Sound and across the Columbia River, across Grays Harbor and our coast. That's how we used to get around. Before there was a network of terrestrial highways, we had marine highways. And there's a lot that we can learn from our heritage to reconnect a lot of these communities that feel a little disjointed. And we can get some of these boats in the water a lot sooner than we can build the new class of jumbo Mark IIs and the hybrid electrics. We can move much more agilely. And when I talk to friends in the San Juans and Commissioner Fuller and Commissioner St. Clair, there's an opportunity for us to think outside the box to remedy these challenges much, much sooner. And that's where my heart is, because neighbors can't wait 5 years for one new boat to come off the line. We need solutions yesterday, and that's the place where we're working hard to think outside the box, get this done.
So I'm going to break the mold a little bit. Do the other three of you have anything to add to what the representative said about the gap in perceptions versus statistics, that sort of thing?
I mean, I would just add that what you're seeing in state ferries is also indicative of a broader lack of investment in maintenance and preservation of our transportation system. So it's not necessarily reassuring, but I promise you that the level of service you're experiencing, communities in Eastern Washington experience when there's on I-90, there's a bridge over the Columbia River at Vantage, there's holes in the bridge and you can see through to the river on I-90. So if you drive through downtown Seattle, you'll see graffiti all over the highway right of way. You'll see trash all over our highways in the state. You'll see broken equipment and guardrails and that sort of thing. This is part of the disinvestment in ferries has been a general disinvestment in the maintenance and preservation of our transportation system. And you're feeling it really hard because ferry service is sort of reliant on these vessels to get people back and forth, whereas the holes on the Vantage Bridge, as long as you don't fall through them, you'll be okay for that day. This is a challenge that we're facing in the context we're in. So I think it doesn't make it better, but I do think we need to sort of realize that across the system we need to make more investments. And as the legislature looks to make investments, it's not just our ferry systems that need more preservation and maintenance. It's also other elements of the system. And as we make new investments, we're going to have to balance to think about we need food to get to us from Eastern Washington. We need medicine to get to us from the ports. We also need ferry systems that can move people across the Sound. When I talked to Director Nevy the other day, he was reminding me that it is sad and shocking when we lose vessels because of maintenance issues. It's also kind of amazing that these machines operate for weeks at a time. I mean, we don't drive our cars continuously for 3 weeks. If you operate machinery that's old and getting older continuously at high volumes through horrible weather conditions, it's kind of amazing, how much they continue to serve us. And we are pouring more money into tired vessels like the Telecom to keep that vessel afloat. And if we were really honest with ourselves, we're throwing good money after bad to keep old equipment running because we have this gap in getting new vessels here. And the procurement on the new vessels, when I took over as chair, we got a bid for a new vessel. We could have gotten it faster than these ones. It was over $400 million per boat. And I said, I live in a ferry impacted community. I love our state ferries, but we cannot pay $420 million per boat for new boats. Within the scope of our whole transportation system, we have to be balanced and equitable, which is why we changed the procurement process and we're in a new procurement, and we expect with 3 bidders that we're gonna get a much better cost for taxpayers. So, we want to solve this problem. It also sits within a broader context, and we've got to make sure we're addressing the broad needs of the public in each of our segments. Ferries deserves a lot of investment, so do others, and how do we balance that is the sort of toughest part of our job, and why progress can seem so slow and so hard is we've got to find consensus to get there.
Clearly, the heck with balance, put it all into ferries. Sorry, did I say that? No.
I've read emails to that effect, so you're not alone.
Okay, so now, one last
Can
question.
I say one
Absolutely,
other thing?
yeah.
Well, I look forward to learning from this group, I'll say, in part because the question for me is when there's that communication gap, how do we prioritize putting some of our energy to solving that? Where is the communication gap really just about transparency, which is important, transparency is important, and where is the communication gap where we can solve it in a way that actually improves the daily life of commuters, right? Are there investments and strategies that make it easier for people to know when to leave, to plan to leave their home, to not have challenges, on the spot? And are there strategies that are really more about long-term understanding what this many multi-year process of reinvestment is going to look like? And I think having some clarity in each of those 2 different strategies might be helpful.
Yeah.
I think John wants to add something to that point. Kenny?
Of course. So John, hang on just one second, and let the other panelists respond.
So in the Navy, I worked in the space with littoral combat ships, LCSs. And LCSs were a new type of warship that we were working on in Southeast Asia. but there were significant problems that we encountered. We encountered technology issues, we encountered material issues, we encountered workforce issues, we even encountered contracting issues. And that we spent a significant amount of effort to try to rectify many of these issues. And in the end, the Navy realized that we need to shift focus from the LCS type of warships. And it hurt a little bit. I think right now, we are kind of in this, like the Senator said, in this juncture, where we need to focus on the now, but we also need to focus on the future as well. And it's hard because I understand that with the ferry system, it really impacts the livelihood of all of us, of all of our community members. And so we need to achieve that perfection, right? We need to strive for perfection. And when we're a little bit below that, it really hurts. And so we're working as hard as we can to ensure that we reach that 100% goal as best we can so no one is harmed.
Okay, but we need a moment. Julian, where's your animal? You weren't supposed to do that. Hold it up. What animal is this?
Happy
Raccoon. I can't believe you did that. John, what did you have to say?
Yeah, and
Please stand up so everybody can hear.
So, thank you for what you're saying. I really appreciate this last question because I think it's different than crewing and the boats, and it's on my department mostly, and communicate. And it's helpful to hear this conversation, which I'll take back to my colleagues. One, we have a public dashboard that's available that shows on-time performance. It goes back at least 5 years. Every quarter we update it, so we do that. But I'm very aware that when we talk about reliability, so we say we're at 98% reliability. If your boat's half an hour, 45 minutes late, that doesn't feel reliable. You're not getting to your...
The person that's facing it is 100% unreliable.
Exactly, and we measure both of those, but we do it separately. So we're out saying, you know, our current goal, because of our crewing issues and vessel issues, is 95% reliability. That means your sailing goes. Pre-COVID, it was 99%. We're playing around with 99% now. At the same time, our folks in Bremerton, it's like, great, that's reliable for a boat every 2.5 hours. And if that boat's late, and you know, and especially the folks in the San Juans, Vashon, when that happens, that doesn't seem reliable. So we're aware of that. And Representative Alvarado, I'll finish with something you just said. Senator Leas worked and helped us get funding for a travel wait time program. So to exactly what you just said, we are in the process now. We have a consultant, we're moving forward so that you will know, if I go to the ferry now, should I drive around? Should I wait for the ferry? So that is coming. I just spoke at a Ferries conference in Seattle, and I talked about, I think folks in Bremerton, I mentioned this to you, that I was on a panel talking about our service contingency plan. We are the only transportation agency, let alone ferry, that we know of that has put out all through COVID and now an explanation of where we are and why. And when I finished, a guy from Boston came up and said, I will fly you to Boston to talk to my legislators and my staff about why this is a good idea. Because when we talk about this, they're like, you're just admitting public failure. You're just holding up a document to say that you're failing every day.
You mean when we talk, you mean internally at WSF?
No, we have on our website, front page, service contingency plan. This is why we've had it for several years. They're like, we would never be allowed to be so honest with our constituents because it seems like failure. We think we owe you that. We're in the process now of updating that for next year. So, you know, we're not the enemy. We are fellow Washingtonians. We care. We are doing what we can with the resources we have. But I really appreciate the work you're doing. I didn't put this pin on performatively. We know we can do better and we need to work with all of you. And so this kind of feedback is helpful, but it's also happening, and I will go back to figure out, you know, Amy, I'll maybe send it to you and you can send it to the people who've signed up here so that you see this stuff and know what's out there. So thanks, Ray. You give good consulting already. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, so I'd like to ask each of the panel members to respond individually to this final question before we add to the panel and build more discussion, okay? So later today, after after lunch for everybody that is still awake, because there's after lunch nap on the schedule. We're going to be thinking about things like a legislative day. And actually, of course, it's not just one day, it's the communication that we all do all the time. This is not the first time you've heard from us, hopefully. So please give us some advice, your pithiest advice, not just about what you would want to hear from the folks in this room if we happen to drop in at Olympia, but what your colleagues would want to hear. You're part of our team in a sense because you're very affected communities. You came today, you took the time to come today. But what about somebody from Spokane? What does the rest of the legislature need to hear? Because none of the money we're talking about will happen without a legislative vote. So if we could start with Representative Shavers.
That's a good question.
What works, in other words? What are the messages?
Right. I think going to Senator's point, the ferry system is within the infrastructure or transportation ecosystem, right? So when you mentioned Spokane have their own issues, right? North of Spokane, there's some construction issues that are causing significant funding issues right now that needs more funding, right? And then in West Seattle, same thing as well. There are bridges that need funding. And for us, at least on Whidbey, with my wonderful commissioner, Jan St. Clair, we have a ferry funding issue. So in my mind, and we have constituents here who can understand the challenges that their own communities are facing. And there are different challenges, not all ferries, but they are an infrastructure challenge. And so my recommendation, and it's a small one, but my recommendation is to couple or to wrap the ferry conversation in the full infrastructure transportation conversation in itself. That ferries is not the only challenge that we're facing. We're facing challenges on road work as well, or bridges, or anything. And I think when you come to legislators, both on the House and Senate side, and they are able to empathize with those unique challenges that they themselves face, I think we can move forward in this conversation more quickly, more smoothly, and more collaboratively.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I think the power of our stories are underrated. I love it when folks write in sharing how ferry service has impacted them. That has helped me in numerous conversations with colleagues. I was appointed midstream last year, so I was the new guy, tried to have a coffee or a burger with every colleague I could. And in one conversation with a fellow named Representative Tom Dent, who represents Moses Lake, he's a Republican on the Transportation Committee. There are no ferries in Moses Lake. But I described how a lack of ferry service was impacting our way of life in Kitsap and how disruptive it had been with service unreliability. Representative Dent then reflected about how family farmers disappearing from Moses Lake, being bought out by bigger corporate agricultural interests, was threatening the way of life there. And all of a sudden, two guys that you wouldn't think had a lot in common were bonding over this, that there are big forces at play. We've got to work as legislators to help our community. Our stories can move the needle. Representative Dent then becomes a champion for ferry funding. Who would have thunk it? That is how stuff happens within our committee. Stories move the needle, and when we bring stories and data about how Vashon or San Juan or Whidbey or Port Townsend or Bremerton is being impacted by service unreliability, that really can, all of a sudden, it's a mind shift, and someone who was planning to oppose extra funding now wants to figure out how they can help.
Senator?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, you all are having impact already. You know, Governor-elect Ferguson did not make this a plank in his campaign for fun. He did it because it's an issue that's on the agenda, that the media is talking about, that you are talking about, and in order for him to run a credible campaign, he had to talk about it. And our governor-elect does not live in a ferry community, he lives in North Seattle. You know, Governor Inslee uses the vessels all the time, he lives it as a Bainbridge resident. Governor-elect Ferguson does not. So the fact that he talked about it and made it such a high focus, I think pat yourselves on the back and take some credit for putting this more solidly on the agenda. I think as we move forward, the other piece I want to give you kudos for is I was so impressed with the ferry specific messaging around Initiative 2117 that went out there. When 695, the I'm in Initiative and $30 car tabs passed, I don't think residents in ferry impacted communities knew what it would do to them if it passed. This year, as you were voting on 2117, if you lived in a ferry impacted community and you didn't know the impacts, then you were an ostrich and you had your head in the sand. Like, it was clear that, yeah, your gas prices might go down, but you also will lose important ferry investments. I appreciate your engagement to tell the whole story. So as we move forward to session, I think first of all 4 of us are from ferry communities. We need to be talking to legislators that are not from ferry communities. And I would say, rather than all 147 legislators, certainly folks on the transportation committees should be a priority of emphasis to make sure they're hearing from you and they're hearing your stories, even though you may not be their constituent. First of all, your cousin or your aunt or your best friend maybe, so get your friends engaged to be talking about this. And if they're on the transportation committee, they're hearing from people all over the state already. Add your voice to that conversation. We also cannot solve this problem without new revenue and without new resources. So being part of that solution, when the legislature rolls out a vision to fund the system and it requires new revenue, I would invite you to be allies in telling that story, just like we did on 2117. Listen, nobody wants to pay more. We're in a tough environment where we all feel constrained. But if we have to choose between not having reliable ferry service and what those incremental costs will be, I think we need to present that picture to the public, that these investments are leading to the kind of service that we need in our community. So those are, I think, some pieces of advice. Representative Nance is right that legislators respond more to stories than to graphs. So I think all humans actually do, not just legislators. So telling stories. Also, my mom always reminded me that honey attracts more than vinegar. So, being hopeful and proactive, getting in someone's face and telling they're terrible and they're failures, not always the best entry point to a conversation. I think saying, listen, things are really hard for me and you can help. Here's how you can help is a better entry point. So a lobby day, being more visible, talking to a broader set of legislators. And I met with a group of business leaders a few weeks ago and I said, we don't need problem admirers right now. We need problem solvers. So get in the ring with us to help tell the story and get some solutions.
I like the honey vinegar thing. Was your mother from Western Kansas?
She was not.
Because mine was.
Western Finland. But
oh, well.
yeah.
That's right, I forgot that. Thank you. I'm going to be going there in the next year.
It's a beautiful spot.
Representative Alvarado.
Reiterating the same things and here being a little bit more pithy. Stay in a coalition. The broader the coalition, the better to move things forward. 2, you've been really successful at identifying some pretty impactful low-hanging fruit with smaller dollar amounts. Keep putting those in front of us because we can maybe move the needle on the smaller things. And then 3, if you're not in the coalition for more revenue, it's hard to take it seriously in this upcoming session. I know that's easier for me to say than some other legislators, so I'm going to say it again. We need more resources. We can't prioritize our way out of this, and so we'll be looking for partnership from all of you to help get to that point.
Thank you all. So there are more seats up here, and we're going to fill them now. Actually, I think we may be short a seat, but Councilmember Jane Fuller from San Juan County, would you come up, please? And Commissioner Janet St. Clair from Island County. And Dan Tuig, who actually, I know this is going to be a shock, so totally counterintuitive. We actually have somebody on the panel who drives boats. Knows how to ski. Well, he isn't doing it, but he's from the International Organization of Masters Navies and Pilots. And Dean, I'm sorry, where are you? Dean Canal, is that right? Yes. Okay. Who is the chair of the Clinton Ferry Advisory Committee. We got everybody a seat? Okay, so you sort of know my MO at this point. You've listened to all of this. Dean, why don't you start us off? What are you taking away here? And what would you like to say to the legislators?
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to do this. I've been on Whidbey Island for 34 years riding the ferries, and I've been the chair of the Clinton Ferry Advisory Committee for as long as most people can remember. So I just want to tell you one story that what I'm trying to get at. So the story is, about a month ago, we got 80 people from Whidbey Island to all park at a park and ride over there, where we have a free bus system. Takes you down to Clinton, you walk onto the boat. We walked onto the boat. We had 4 musicians, we had a music therapist, and we sang all the way across on the boat. And when we arrived in Mukilteo over here, we went to the 115, which is a new bus that just started by Community Transit, started mid-August, which shoots you down to the Linwood Park and Ride, from which you can get the light rail system. And it was the most fun I've had in all that time, and people loved it. And you know, being chair of the Ferry Advisory Committee, I hear from people, and I've heard more about that, people writing to say that they've changed their patterns. They're now walking onto the ferry boat, into that light rail, and going where they need to go. It's more response than I've had in all these years, and it's such a wonderful thing. So my point is, here we are talking about how are we going to get enough money to keep this system going. But let me tell you, the system doesn't work. What you're trying to do, you use these ferry boats as a floating bridge to take cars from one shore to another shore. As we all know, as anybody in DOT knows, we have more and more cars all the time. You can't expand that route going across there. 2 boats, that's the most you're going to do, because you only have 2 docks on each side. And so the only solution, if you look at the WSF long-range plan, is to get the cars off the boats. And it's been so discouraging to me that I haven't seen anything, or very little, that WSF has done to accomplish that. We're talking today about getting more money to get more reliable boats, but still we're only going to have 2. And in my 34 years of riding the ferry boats, the only constant I've seen is every year in the summertime, that ferry line gets longer. You're looking at an hour-and-a-half ferry line. So I think to get the funding that WSF needs, you're going to get $500 million from the Climate Commitment Act, because you're doing hybrid electric ferry boats. You're solving a climate problem that we have now. So how about if you went another step further and you tried to do the same thing the DOT is trying to do, is to handle transportation in this Puget Sound area. We've spent $80 billion on a light rail system up there. That's a tremendous commitment. Let's get on board with that. Let's get people out of the cars, off of the boats, and try and do it a different way. Otherwise, we'll be sitting here 10 years from now, we could have the same meeting and talk about the problems that the ferry system has. But I just don't think you can handle the increased traffic that you have in the Puget Sound area by pretending that ferry boat is a bridge. And so that's what I'd like to see. And I am so happy to have this opportunity to get some people that maybe are concerned about that long-range plan and want to put some effort into that, not just building more boats, you know. So that's it.
Senator, I saw the 2 of you. I watched your body language. When you started talking about the whole thing where you got on the bus and you went here and you went there, you 2 reacted. What was that about?
Look, I think it's an essential component of the transportation system. I think figuring out, I was grateful to be able to help steward some of the proposals from community to figure out how we enhance water taxi service to Vashon as an immediate solution. We also see that ridership on that is way up, more than we anticipated. People are happy to take that as a form of transportation. I'm excited to be working with King County Council member Teresa Mosqueda and others to figure out better connectivity from the water taxi. How do we make sure that the bus on Island is working, and the buses from the downtown up to First Hill and other destinations where we know people are headed. So I think that connectivity piece is critical, and if we can move faster in a way that supports residents, gets people moving in a reliable way, improves the environment and helps leverage the other transportation investments that we're making, that is a win-win-win. So look forward to more ways that we can do exactly what you're talking about.
So would it be fair to say that that's, so if you spend less money or you find better things to spend your money on, is that something that's in the kit of tricks here? You know, is it cheaper to have a bus system or, you know, improve some of that stuff, a water taxi, rather than the money that gets spent on a ferry? We have to spend the money on the ferries. I'm not trying to say not, but
I mean, I think
it's just a target of opportunity.
Senator Claire Wilson always reminds me of yes and rather than the no but. Yes and I think what I hear, which I love, is this thinking about how do we enable people to make those multimodal choices. We call this the Mukilteo multimodal terminal for a reason, but we're not yet to where it needs to be. I think the one just sort of reality check that I want to insert is our current ferry system is still in crisis. We're not out of the woods yet. And so as I've talked to community, I agree that we need to be thinking about foot ferries and passenger ferries in the mix. We need our current WS staff to get their core service restored and back on track. So we need to sort of think about how we phase this, and where we've got partners like King County or Kitsap County, San Juan, I know there's a conversation emerging there that want to step in quicker to get that service. I think we can be a partner. I do like the idea of including foot ferry service in the long range plan. We should be thinking, after we get out of this crisis, how do we think about this in the fleet? I just want to be really cautious that the team at WSF barely has their arms around the current problem. I don't want to add more to their plate until we can get there. Your story about the music therapists on the boat, though, reminded me, this is why I was so passionate as we crafted our Kids Ride Free policy to make sure that ferries were included. I want our kids, not just the kids on our islands and ferry impacted communities, but I want every kid in Washington to know they can ride our ferries for free, because when you take that first ride, and you feel the wind in your face, and you maybe see an orca or a dolphin or whatever out there, like, you think about ferries in a different way. And so that joy of the journey, I definitely want our kids to connect to that. That's why it's free for kids. And then the reason I whispered to Emily was when I got on the city council, I was on the community transit board. I asked for a bus line to the ferry 15 years ago. It only took 15 years to get them to do it. So I was sort of, that was my pithy comment I was making to her.
You didn't call us up, we would have helped.
Yeah. You guys weren't here yet, so we needed you.
Okay, next, please. What's your reaction?
Lots of reactions. I mean, I was listening to you all, and I so appreciate this event, and so appreciate you all spending your time today with us in this way. I couldn't stop taking notes. I mean, listening to you guys speak to the questions that were posed by Rick, just the insights you have, hearing of your experiences of legislators, getting advice from you on how we can do advocacy with and for you was tremendous. I thank you so much for being here today, and for, just giving us a window into the hard work you're doing. And so I want to start off with some gratitude to complement that, and on behalf of San Juan County, and I say the town of Friday Harbor, because the administrator is here today, and I'm delighted to see her, Denise Colsa. We are grateful in San Juan County for years-long efforts to raise more money for ferries. We are not blind to that at all. At a granular level, community members may not be as aware. We know the Ferry Caucus has worked very hard, including our LD40 representatives, to bring more money into the system. And hearing you talk about, though, the protracted problems going forward due to lack of revenues is also very helpful and very, very poignant and painful to hear, but it's a reality. Another level of gratitude I want to give is to Governor Inslee. Without his support, his active support in partnership with WSF, our cry for emergency relief would not have been heard this summer. And the San Juan County Council had to put out a cry for relief because of the absolutely momentous negative impacts of ferry service disruptions between 23-24 and particularly from May to August of this year. And so we were so grateful that the governor took note of our issues, and he took note of our issues because we provided data and evidence and stories of how our county was being impacted that gave him an evidence base for his staff to understand the impacts of ferry service disruption in our communities on the islands. And so with that, what we are able to do now is pilot some local solutions. And we want to share with you over the course of the next year plus what our results are from doing some local things to solve our local problems on the water. A challenge we have with the solution I really appreciated hearing you speak to is that as a county, once you get on the islands, you don't have public transit of any kind. There was already, thanks to Representative Rammel, a walk-on maximization study that was completed in 2023. Very useful study, great and helpful recommendations. We are challenged as a county on our islands in terms of public transit. That isn't necessarily the state's problem to solve, right? And so we're actually updating our comp plan right now. We have to look to the future. How do we solve that problem? Do we create a transportation benefit district, right? So we're gonna lean into those kinds of local solutions as well. So we're extremely grateful for the governor's support to enable us to do some of that. We also appreciate the studies this is legislative session funded in terms of economic impacts. We actually asked for that of the governor in our joint town and county council letter to the governor in the fall of 2023. We asked for an economic impact study for San Juan County. You added some dollars to what the governor put forward, which was $90,000 for San Juan County, and pushed it out to about $160,000 for the entire system. We hope that San Juan County will get a piece of the analysis that is done in that. And also, and I'm really grateful for this to the legislature, is funding a passenger-only ferry study. We look forward to the results of that study at the end of this year, and we know you're gonna benefit from that. It's hard for you to look in and dive into, does the state fund passenger-only ferry service again in the future without having that information? So we're very excited that that study will be happening too. One last piece of gratitude, and then I'll just close out just one or two other things, and it's to WSF. And I'm glad John Casina is here today because I have been working with him since I started sitting on council in 2023, and his colleagues who are incredibly hardworking. And I would like to say I'm delighted to see some of our FAC representatives here today because we have worked tirelessly in the last 2 years to develop a cooperative working relationship with WSF to find local solutions to small challenges we experience day to day, as granular as loading the boats properly, ensuring quotas are met, and things like that. And we are working with WSF as a partner to try and work on little problems that go a long way in solving some of our bigger problems in terms of just getting on the boat because the right quota was adhered to so you can get anacortes and make your medical appointment. So anyway, gratitude to our relationship that continues to grow with WSF. We know they work hard and they know that we care, and we want to model what Fix Our Ferries is doing and show more gratitude and love. We'll find our ways to do that and appreciate the examples. And I just want to continue the conversation and wow, communications is an issue, but it's a part of the bigger problem, and we all need to keep looking at all of it. So.
Yeah, I'll continue Commissioner St. Clair.
So yes, I'm Janet St. Clair from Island County, and Dean, thank you for sharing that story. That was a fun story to hear about when it was happening. Yeah, well, there were a few things happening. I just want to begin with gratitude. I read, John, your emails every week, and I dive into the data, and really the communication, the solution-focused way in which you guys are approaching this. As someone who comes out of a world in which I've always been a systems thinker, I think the issue is, the systems in which these transportation problems exist are very real. I live on an island connected by a bridge, so I'm equally invested in a bridge as I am in a ferry because I don't want to be, in a cataclysmic event, we're going to be isolated over there. We're the largest cul-de-sac in Washington State over on Camino. And I also appreciate the innovation coming out of the coalitions. Jane and I have also participated in DC on some ferry issues with Puget Sound Regional Council and others, that the coalitions really bring forward out of the box and innovative thinking that help us
move forward. As a transit board member, I'm a board member for Island Transit, and as a transit rider, when I was in King County, I have for years elevated the importance of community connections. Early in my career, I managed programs in 7 Puget Sound counties. And I remember, this is how old I am, so just go with me here. I remember riding the Bremerton Ferry to go to do my supervision on my services over there with a cell phone that was about this big, you know, and just worrying I could do the work going across. So the system of this and the importance of our community connectors, that's the language we use, the ability to create as we move forward in our future, both in terms of enhancing transportation, but reducing climate impact. I am a full-throated supporter of, at some point, I don't want to try to do everything at once because then you do nothing well, but at some point, you know, as a lover of history, revisiting the history of our mosquito fleet and the ability to just move people around. That's what we are when we're on transit boards, when we're doing this work. We're people movers. We're people movers, and we're investing in people moving, in access to economic opportunity, to healthcare, to education, all of those things. That's why we move people around. So I am very supportive. I think you used the word mosquito fleet, right? Going back to our mosquito fleet days and really leaning into that. Something that hasn't been said that's been a priority for Island County for a long time is the importance of overnight parking. Because then people can park in Mukilteo. Tourists don't besiege us in the summer by car, but can come on by passenger ferry. And at Island Transit, we're committed to then moving them all over the island as they need to. So I do want to note, and that's true also when you go to Anacortes, right? Mm-hmm. The importance of overnight parking in this system is also important to us. I think I talked about the importance of better leveraging and collaboration with our federal electeds. They have deeper pockets than we do. Mm-hmm. And there are some simple solutions, such as the 50-mile rule, that can help us increase funding to Washington State Ferries. And finally, I'm going to talk again about the importance of our local workforce and our workforce partners and the importance of the people who work on our ferries and the future workforce for our ferry system. And the piece that we're very committed to is workforce housing. We have 2 amazing ferry companies, construction companies. I've visited one in LaConner and of course Nichols Brothers. And if we can just find affordable housing so that they can recruit the staff to be able to build the boats, we're doing, again, a triple benefit. We're getting our boats built, we're providing livable wage jobs, we're supporting our local government and our local economies. So that would be my final point, is really looking at the whole system of the way we do these things.
We're fortunate today to have, I mentioned this earlier, somebody who actually drives ferries, or did until, what was it, 2016, I think you told me.
2016.
Yeah. Dan is VP of the International Organization of Masters, Mates, and Pilots. First question, what's the difference between a master and a mate and a pilot?
So that's a very good question, because
it's just personal for me.
Well, it's actually a really good question because it speaks to the workforce development problem that we have at Washington State Ferries, because look at it this way. A person with a mate license who put in their time, they worked up from an able-bodied sea person, we call them now seafarer, that's what they're called, instead of able-bodied seaman, but a person who works their way up from the unlicensed deck position into the pilot house for the first time becomes a mate. They get a mate's license. For Washington State Ferries, it requires an inland mate license of any gross tons. So you're driving the vessels that are over 1,600 gross tons. Think of that as a bachelor's degree.
Oh, what?
A bachelor's degree.
Okay.
Okay? And then you put in your time, you do your study, and you take your exams, and you become a master. And that's a master's degree. But under federal law, Washington State Ferries does not leave the dock unless there is a federally licensed, unlimited ship pilot for the Puget Sound ferry routes that they are going to take that boat across. And that license, the federal pilotage license, is a matter of experience and time and study, and the exam for it is to literally draw the chart from memory. They give you a blank chart, you sit down and you draw it, and then you spit out onto a piece of paper all of the local knowledge that you have. You're basically rewriting something called a coast pilot that describes the whole area that you are. You're doing it from memory. And for, I'm a ship pilot for all of Southeast Alaska and also the Puget Sound ferry routes. And so Southeast Alaska for me was 34 charts I had to draw. In Puget Sound, to drive the ferries, it's 9. But they're difficult. It's a very large area of water. You honestly have to memorize the depths of the water every inch on the chart and then spit it back out and put it on a piece of paper and give it to the Coast Guard, who then takes it, sits it on a light table and says, that's not quite right. And you have to pass 90% or better in order to get this license. And so what we do at Washington State Ferries, and the law requires that every single person who actually has the con, who's actually driving the ship, and is in control of the navigation, is a federal pilot, which is why, yes, the masters on board are pilots, but we also require in the MMMP that every single mate on board is also a pilot and has done all of that. And why? So that we can plug and play people all around the fleet, moving back and forth anytime we want to. They can drive any ship on any run at any time. And that is the challenge that Masters, Mates, and Pilots has had in working through our recent workforce challenges, shortage of people. COVID happened. COVID was just the trigger. We have been looking at this retirement curve going to hit us for years.
People call it the silver wave.
Well, I would call it the silver wave, the silver tsunami, what do you want to call it? We saw it coming, and COVID was just a trigger. And so suddenly the system was stretched, it was stretched. The legislature a few years ago put out a study or funded a study on how to reduce overtime, because it was like, we're paying all this overtime. Well, the only way to really reduce overtime is to increase the number of people that you have. And so when that study was first started, it was Siemens Group was doing the study. They came in and spoke to me and said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, this is not about overtime. This is about where are we going to find the next generation of people that are going to be able to pilot these vessels." And so under the federal pilot law, it's 46 USC 8502, that says that these boats don't leave the dock unless there is a pilot at the con. That is the crux of the problem in the pilot house at Washington State Ferries. But I'm here to talk to the legislature about what's working and what's not. So 2 years ago.
Hang on just a second. Raise your hand if you knew what it took to be able to get the license that he just described. Well, you did, of course you did. That's what, maybe 20% of us, and we're ferry aware communities. So John, you may want to take a note. That's a really interesting piece of education. You know, when I hear somebody say, well, we don't have enough Coast Guard licensed people, I'm thinking like the license you need to operate a beauty salon or something. I mean, it's different. It really is qualitatively and quantitatively different. And so maybe that's something for you to think about.
Yeah, also I'd just like to, for Dan, what he's saying, we would be in this, the 25 of us would be a very different conversation if people were getting injured on our boats. And we're safe because of his members and the IBU and the engine room. And so I think it's important, as frustrating as it is, and last night, when I saw that the Inner Island was going to be out this morning, I was like, really, tomorrow? You can't, when that happens, I know how frustrating it is for all of you, but we need that crew to make sure that you get to where you're going safely. And so it's frustrating, but the work they do to sometimes thousands of people on a boat it's key. But Rick, I appreciate what you said, and I think helping the public understand, because I hear from people who say, they're just glorified parking attendants. Why is this such a big deal? Well, wait until there's an accident or a fire, or they're rescuing your friend whose kayak overturned. It's a whole different story.
And this process is super confusing. I asked John to make a chart, and the process of becoming a chief engineer is equally complex. So Ferries now has this like much more easy to understand chart that shows the hours and months and years it takes to work your way through this process, both for the master mates and pilots and for the chief engineers. It's been part of our challenge. It's like we can't snap our fingers and get more pilots and get more chief engineers because it takes years to work through this system. So John can get you I said they needed to be charts that even a legislator could understand. So they're pretty good, actually.
So I interrupted you.
That's all right. So I work with John all the time. As a matter of fact, those charts you're just talking about, I had a lot to do with that. But what I was trying to say is, from the master's mates and pilots perspective, I can't speak to the engineers. I mean, I could, but I'm not going to. I couldn't speak for the unlicensed deck people. I could, but I'm not going to. But we all work together, and we all realize that what we have is a shortage of people at the bottom end. And so when I was saying, a mate's license is a bachelor's degree, a master's license is a master's degree, the pilotage is a doctorate. You have a doctorate in boats. And so to get to those places that we do, we had to figure out a way, based upon the shortage that we had, how are we going to do this? And so 2 years ago, Steve Nevy and I sat down and had a nice conversation one day. He said, hey, Dan, what do you think? How are we going to fix this? And so I explained to him that the shortage of masters and mates is fixable, but it only takes money. And what he and I created was what we referred to as the pilotage program. And so we created a program where we took our unlicensed deck people from the Inland Boatmen's Union, and we've taken a lot of them, and they're not thrilled about that. But we've taken the unlicensed people, and we put them into a program that we called AB to Mate. So you have this, you get your initial mate's license, and this is your bachelor's degree. And then we took that, and we created what we called the pilotage program. And the pilotage program gave us the ability to take people who are actually working in the fleet, pay them to do the job, to study, and get the next step. Sometimes doing that kind of studying can take years. We kind of shortened it down to a one-year program because we gave them the opportunity to do it. And so I can sit here right now and tell you that I have got 24 people right now sitting on the bench waiting for a job. There are 14 more who just started their final training the other day. There will be another dozen in January that will go through the final piece of their training, and the MMP has fixed our problem. We're done. Now we have to figure out how to keep it rolling at a pace that we can make sure that now that we've filled this bench and people are waiting for jobs, we're going to start seeing the retirements again. And so, this is we raised the wages as retirements came and slowed down. We've done all of that. But Senator Elias, earlier you said, what we really need to do is figure out a way to keep the workforce development money rolling. It's vital, absolutely vital for this system to be able to look for the new deckhands in the high schools. Look for the new engineers, wherever they happen to be, and give them the opportunity to get in here and get these jobs and find a way to get through the process, to get where they need to go, to be able to take the jobs. In looking at the pilotage program, one of the things that we focused on was diversity. And within the diversity piece of it, what we discovered was that when we gave people the opportunity to come out of the fleet and study, and we were thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and who are we going to see coming into this, the most surprising thing that we saw, and I'm thrilled about it, was the single moms. We had the single moms in the fleet, and they suddenly said, hey, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I'm still getting paid, I can take care of my family, I can do this, and I can advance. And that was the group that we found that we then focused on. Where are these people? Let's get them back into the program. And so I do drive boats. I can drive anything, really. as far as the boat is concerned. But the reality is Washington State Ferries needs to look deep and look deep into the high schools. It's the outreach. I went to an event 2 weekends ago with Representative Julia Reed, and she opened the new Sea Scout dock in Ballard. And it was just it was refreshing to see that there is a group of young people who are actually realizing that the maritime industry exists, that there are pathways to go to get you where you need to go, and these are family wage jobs if you can find the people to take them.
So I'm going to, we had a sort of a plan for today, and I'm going to change it a little bit on the fly. So thanks for everybody who did something here, but what I'm reading here is an opportunity. So what I'd like to do is expand the panel to everybody in the room. So you're all now on deck. Sorry, I couldn't help using the word deck.
We need you all to fill out a chart with each run and the depth.
And the depth, yeah.
In 1 inch increments.
Does the deckhands don't have to do that? You've listened to this morning. Without going into the, like gripes mode, what do you have to say to these people? Raise your hand if you'd like to speak. What advice do you have for them? What's resonating for you? What did you hear that you really thought was great and would be effective and helpful? You're going to really embarrass me if nobody raises your hand. Go ahead.
So Denise Colseth, I'm with the town of Friday Harbor. And I really appreciate so many comments that were made today. I too have learned a lot, and thank you for being here for us. I think hearing Representative Alvarado and also Nance talk about communication and transparency is really important, because I think as much as we're united, we all have distinct issues. And even within the San Juans, we have distinct issues. So I happen to be on San Juan. The ferry drops folks right in downtown. So transportation around the island isn't quite a challenge that it is on some of our other islands where it is an issue. How do people get into East Sound or into Lopez Village? And so even among us, there are differences. I think hearing the council member from Island County say, if our bridge went out, oh my goodness, we'd be stranded. That's us. That's us without a bridge. So to just give you some sense.
Does anybody know this?
What's that? Yeah, right. So it's not like who's got it worse, of course, not at all. But I think understanding the different situations. My son has moved to Seattle, and he went with a buddy over to the Vashon Strawberry Festival and had a great time. And I said, "Did you have any issues?" And he said, "No, I didn't, but I had read there was some, sometimes you luck out and you don't have any issues." But then that friend came up to San Juan, and he said, "We have to catch the 240 because if we don't, the next boat's at 6. He's like, "What? Let me see your ferry schedule." And so he saw it, and he was like, "Wow, your boats are spaced that far apart." This is a kid who grew up on Vashon, had no idea what it's like in other places. So I think it's important for us to be able to share information. I think it's important that we be able to explain differences in the issues that we face. I think really being transparent is important, and John has always been terrific with me. He responds to me every time I've sent him an email, which isn't too often. Often it's to say thank you for his messaging, but I will say, so for us in particular, I know they don't break it down granularly on reliability, but that is a big issue in our community when they read about these high 90% of reliability, and we're definitely not feeling like that's true for San Juan. So it may be for system-wide, but when you feel like it's always your boats not going, it's like, well, lucky you, whoever,
So
Bremerton or whatever, good for you that it's consistent, but for us, it's not feeling that way. And so I think it's really important that we have maybe use different terminology. Maybe those are runs completed, but it's not reliability. And I think people can accept it if we're just honest. If we just say the boats aren't going today, if we just say we're reducing your number of runs, if we just are really transparent with people, because it's this lack of acknowledgement of what they're experiencing that is frustrating. So, but anyway, I do want to thank all of you for all of the work that you do. Our run is probably the bane of WSF's existence. We understand.
The bridge I was referring to was not Whidbey Island, it was Camino Island. We're a county of 2 islands.
Oh, okay.
And so that's the only on and off access.
Yeah.
So just for clarification.
Washington State Ferries is our only, I mean, it's, you know, unless you're Chris Pratt and have a Learjet, but for the rest of us, but I'm excited about this organization, glad to be here today, and appreciate all of your input and appreciate all the work Jane's done on behalf of our county. She's worked really tirelessly for more than a year. And I know that we're complex and we're not special. I know that it's complicated. And so I think our community is willing to work with Washington State Ferries. I think the education we got over the past year from the engineers union telling us their frustrations and staffing issues. So many people don't know how it works. I have shared that chart. You do have a flow chart that's really helpful. I've shared that with lots of folks because running utilities, I can relate to Washington State Ferry's issues, right? I can't grab a wastewater operator off the street, right? They have to be in our water department requires somebody who's been in there 12 years. So when that person who's now 72 retires, and my predecessor did no succession planning, I can completely relate to the difficulties Washington State Ferries run. We're in the same boat with water and sewer. Any community that's got water and sewer, you're probably in the same boat too, because we're all stealing each other's operators because people aren't coming into these fields. So I get that. I've talked too long, but I'm just glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Leader, you're one of us. Hang on, I'll come back to you. Go ahead,
Families
please.
last. Families last.
I promise.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Beth. I'm just a resident. My husband and I, we moved to Bremerton like 6 months ago. Before that, we lived in Seattle for like 2 years. Before that, all other places. It was really interesting to find out about Washington's ferry system, and we moved out to Bremerton because of the fact that we couldn't afford living in Seattle. We both work in Seattle, but we couldn't afford buying a house, and that was a dream of ours. I appreciate all the work that you guys have done before we ever showed up. It's appreciated. As someone who also works in government, I recognize that finding people to take on that institutional knowledge and finding people in general has been really, really hard. So again, appreciate all of the work that you guys have done. Strong believer of livable wages for government workers. I worked in other state governments where I had to leave because I couldn't afford to live on a government job. And so I am very, very happy to hear that you are working to support that and affordable housing. So I can't fix that, and nothing I say right now is going to fix those really big problems. So what I'm trying to do is help from the resident side. Like, how can we continue to provide that transparency so everyone knows what's going on? Because also working in government, you can have this project that you're working on, and people who don't know about it will just be like, why isn't it done yet? And there's 7,000 different steps that you need to work through before you can get there. And I think, as people have been saying, that transparency is super important, because if you can say, well, we're not here yet, but we're over here, this is the step that we're on, I think that's really helpful. I think it's also really important from like our coalition side to look at what our community is saying and make sure that we're not spreading misinformation. We haven't been here for very long. As I said, we bought a house 6 months ago in Bremerton. And about a month ago, I saw someone on the coalition's page say, WSF is trying to get rid of the Bremerton-Seattle route. And so then we're sitting here and we're panicking because we both work in Seattle, and now I hear people rumoring about this route being taken away. And so it's really important that we attack those rumors and that misinformation head on. something that we use in my group is called misinformation inoculation. And I think that would be really helpful, because I think if we are able to do that, we can help address those potentially emotionally charged moments so they're not as emotionally charged. And also, when you are transparent, even as you said, it's not admitting failure. It's being honest and setting expectations for people. So I think you're doing a great job in doing that, and I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you.
The final thing that I would want to say from the resident side, because getting into Seattle is pretty easy, but coming home, I am standing in lines waiting for a ferry. Simple things, or maybe they're not simple, but from my perspective, and if it's not, let me know, but providing covering at Pier 50 so I'm not waiting in the rain, that would be really nice. Wi-Fi on the boat, that way I can work on the boat and reduce or combine my commute time with my work time, that would be excellent. And then also infrastructure at the pier. So for instance, when we wait in the line for the fast ferry, if you've ever been there, there are so many people that are just sitting on the ground with their laptops open. It's not enjoyable. The ground's dirty, it's cold, there's not heat, or there's probably heating, but it's not great. But we can't get out of the line. There are seats on the side, we can't get out of the line, because if we do, we might not make that ferry. And so finding better ways to provide infrastructure for these commuters that sometimes have to work while we're commuting is really important. I know I took a lot of time, but again, thank you. I hope these potentially small things can help, and I'm really excited to be part of this. When we moved out to Bremerton, I said, we're gonna rely on the ferries, and so I'm just gonna be a friend of the ferry. I'm just gonna do whatever I can to love it and make it better, and I'm really excited to be here, so thank you.
So, thank you. I just want to point out, hey, Beth, so what I'm hearing here is that one way to get more out of the boats is to make it so that people could work on the boats or waiting for the boats. So I just want to make sure we got that.
Well, and I just want to say that we are in active conversations with WSF leadership about getting Wi-Fi and ideally free Wi-Fi on the boats, and they are bringing forward, it's going to cost money, nothing's free in life, but we're talking about how do we scale and scope that and get that implemented. Maybe John can give an update.
You're not telling them that just 3 days ago you were berating me about this issue. It was nicely berating, but no, it was nice. He doesn't hit hard. I don't know, if you've ridden a long time, you might remember Boingo, the service that people paid for, and they pulled out because people wouldn't join their system because it was so lousy. So our IT person, we were talking with Senator Leas on Wednesday night, we're looking at Starlink, and on the Bremerton run specifically, we know when the Chimicum's there, those of you who haven't been on the Chimicum, the windows were treated to solve a problem of the seats getting discolored and disfigured by the sun. That treatment means you don't get cell service. So Bremerton has a boat every 2.5 hours, and when we have to assign that boat there, they can't do any work, and it's debilitating. So we're working on that issue. So we are working with Starlink. We're about to pilot it. One of the things we're talking about is piloting it on the Bremerton route to expand it. It's expensive, but Senator Leas wants to work on that because I think in 2024, 2025, there's a reasonable expectation that you can work on the boat, especially if you only have one every 2.5 hours, that your employers are thinking, well, okay, you can work on the way there and back. So I think we're well on our way to that.
And the idea came from Bainbridge resident Emily Randall, who's going to be the Congresswoman. So you can thank her if you see her. She's the one that said, hey, you need to work on this. But maybe she met you in Bremerton and you were walking around, or she's been on the boat too.
And
so.
that's true. If you turn to your right, Senator, Representative Nance has been also,
good.
He may be another haranguer.
Yeah, good, okay.
But
he's
not
bugging
the
Chair
rank
Fine.
and
So.
But you made a point when you were speaking. It wasn't just about Wi-Fi. It wasn't just about Wi-Fi when you were talking about this. It was the sheer physical ability to have a place. You know, you can't really use a laptop very well in the rain. That doesn't work very well. I know when I worked in a corporate environment, I could get a new laptop if I spilled a Coke into the keyboard, but that's not what you're trying to do. Okay, so it's a little bit more, I just want to make sure we're capturing the idea that it's not just about Wi-Fi. I know you probably realize this is obvious, but making people able to work when they're in transit would relieve some of the pressure and frustration on WSF.
And I just wanted to add one other thing. For communication,
Okay, Wendy, you're up.
I don't know if you guys have seen like DNR and WSOT, Washington Department of Transportation, have the most hilarious Facebook posts and Instagram posts. And like, you might think it's kind of stupid, but it actually gets out to people and it sets like the message and the expectation. And when people see that, they're like, this is hilarious, I'm gonna send this to a friend.
So John, be funnier.
Stop yelling at me. Maybe it's not funnier, maybe it's just funny.
No, John's very funny, he just needs to put it on Twitter and or his team.
Just get like a, you know, a Gen Z.
We actually have, her name's Callie, a new Gen Z person who's responsible for going out on the ferries and doing, you're about to see some cool stuff.
Amazing.
And I think we're about to be allowed to join Instagram. So,
Nice.
Thank you. Wendy?
Yeah, you know, it's just interesting in listening to this. We've been involved, I've been on the Ferry Advisory Committee for Vashon for about 2 years and then got involved in this with these wonderful folks. And what I hear is really, we have a really bad long-term issue, you know, and we're trying to get these boats built, get the funding for it and all these types of things. But we have a lot of short-term issues and a lot of them have to do with transparency and communications. And I think one of the things, if the legislature can help Washington State Ferry become more nimble, that's to me what I hear most frustration from people and communities. Like, I was down at a ferry dock the other day taking my husband to a colonoscopy and they rammed the dock. And it was because the system had been down, the boat had a steering problem. Anyway, there was 40 cars backed up. We don't have a camera down at our dock, at Tahlequah Dock, that's far enough up that you can see anything. I've asked for 2 years for that. And I'm told there isn't money, and I know, John, I know that they're working on it. But having a flexibility fund of some sort that allows communities to address simple problems that might make it better for people and not take 2 and 3 years to do that would reduce the frustration. Accountability and transparency. Let's look at the system, the on-time reliability and the on-time performance and the reliability. I spent time with it the other day, the on-time performance. There are negative numbers in there. I called WSF and asked, what is a negative number on something that you're charting how late you are? And she couldn't answer that to me. She wrote to somebody and sent me an email. I have not heard back. But again, let's get numbers that mean something to you as legislators and mean something to us as riders. And so in working maybe with John, maybe a committee of some sort that evolves, that is a part of these stakeholders here and Washington State Ferries and the legislators to come up with some of these solutions that can make our lives that are very difficult right now a little bit better while we go through all the rest of the processes.
Okay. Justin?
So I'm trying to distill my 18 comments into like one cool comment, but it's going to be 2. Dan and Clyde, I want to thank you both for the efforts that you're doing on the education side of things. I'm proud to have a nephew that's going through the Marine Academy right now. I think he's a year in at this point, so a 20-year-old kid who is being supported in the education, it's being funded, and he's being paid to do the work, to do the education.
Which academy?
Where is Spencer going? What is he being trained through? It's through the scholarship program that's being run. Yeah, my tags.
Oh, that's Spencer.
Spencer Rischel. Anyway, it's been really cool to see a kid come out of high school who really had zero direction, and fall into something that now he sends, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever pictures to his family and say, hey, I'm on the such and such boat right now. Anyway, whatever we can do to build that from a long-term sustainability standpoint, legislatively, more money. Just find it. You guys can find it. The discussion that I'm hearing here, and I've had a lot of discussion with WSF, I think WSF is actually doing a pretty good job in triage, in realizing that we're 20 years behind and we have to patch these things. The thing that worries me is the 25-year outlook, because I anticipate, we've been having this discussion for a long time, and I worry that we will lose the 25-year outlook as we go through the triage process. So I don't want it to go unnoticed that we still have to have long-range thinking, even though we're trying to solve all of these short-range issues right now. And I would love to be a voice in any of that, and helping support the legislature and John's team in not losing that long-range focus, because ultimately it was a lack of long-range focus that got us to where we are today. And then to me, the elephant in the room that nobody's talked about is we keep talking about funding, and I'm worried about funding from the federal level to support our needs. And so if we're going to talk about funding, let's not forget that there is an elephant in the room that we have not addressed, and that is at the federal level. How do we stay relevant? Because I think there's going to be a lot of hogs at the trough for not a lot of feed.
So Justin, help me out on that one. So to what level are we currently receiving federal funding? And what are you thinking is the realm of possibility?
Well, so I think, the Infrastructure Act is money that's funneling into Washington State, and we're only seeing, as I understand it, we're only seeing the beginnings of that funding really getting into our communities. And that's infrastructure funding that's not just ferries. It's infrastructure funding for the bridges. It's infrastructure funding for all of our roads programs, our highways that we're dealing with. Will we see that funding conduit disappear? And so as we're building up all these wonderful things to get this work done, in 2 years, are we not going to be able to get that work done? And so, you can come up with a great 10-year transportation plan. Every one of us in this room could do a great one. But if all the money disappears, that's worrisome.
So are you saying that the change in the administration is going to cause
that the administrative priorities?
I just wanted to find out if you were pointing to that.
Yeah, no, I'm pointing to a change in administrative priorities, and our electrification of the fleet is a big push, and we're able to tap dollars. I'm saying I have no tapping of dollars. We as a collective are tapping dollars to electrify the fleet that are coming from various initiatives at the federal level. How can we grab money for greening up the ferries, this electrification initiative? If those funding mechanisms start to disappear, are we able to still continue that stuff forward? And I'm not proposing a solution here. It's just in my brain, the 25-year outlook is really critical so that we don't end up in this situation 25 years from now.
I think just on that point, Congressman Larson is the ranking member on the Transportation Committee in the House. Senator Murray will be the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. So we have really powerful voices in Congress. Most of the federal funding we receive is by formula, and so the administration, whoever the administration's ability to influence that is fairly limited. Congress has written those formulas. We get it on a per capita basis. There are some grants that we've gotten, and that is the piece where there is a risk. It is not all of our federal money goes away. It's also worth noting that maybe about 20% of our transportation budget is federal. So if all of it went away, it's a hit, but we still are funding most of this locally, and it's not going to go all the way, because a ton of it is by formula, and we've got some allies there. There definitely will be marginal problems. I think there's some big projects that we've got federal grants coming for. I wouldn't be surprised to see the new administration sort of put a target on some of them. I think our efforts here to fund ferries in a sustainable way, for better or worse, will be not the first line of defense. We've got other places we'll have to do that, but it's a good context to be.
Well, and I guess I would try to take the word ferries out of that conversation, as you all have alluded to. Just the transportation needs of the state generally is the potential for that to be a drawdown from all aspects. Because I think it's important, I can't remember who said it, that we honor the needs of our folks in Spokane. You know, if they can't get the bridge fixed, then they're going to say, why should you get the ferry fixed?
There's an opportunity here too where, without a doubt, the change of administration, big challenges, many of which are unforeseeable, unforeseen. I think there's a few opportunities here too where American shipbuilding is in a perilous place. I spent 7 years in China seeing up close how a real focus on maritime development actually works. We have dropped the ball since the 1970s. We need to get the ball back into focus and start delivering tonnage off American manufacturing lines. This is an administration that I think, with some of their allies, is going to have more of a focus on manufacturing, and they're also going to use a lot of the bipartisan infrastructure law and funding that was already allocated to try to perhaps rejig and fill up those Louisiana shipyards and elsewhere. That rising tide lifts all boats, puns intended, where we need to get the muscle back. Part of the reason why we had a $400+ million bid, there aren't as many shipbuilders as America needs for us to restock our Navy, restock our ferries that are in 37 different states. WSF is the largest, but all over the country, and yet we don't have a coherent federal maritime policy, and it's we pay a grievous cost as taxpayers and as ferry riders because of that. My hope is that there will be a couple silver linings to this administration. One of them could be more advanced manufacturing and more focus on maritime.
And that's a beautiful response. And I'll keep the optimism.
So we have time maybe for a couple more of these discussions. Go ahead.
Anthony Hempstead, I'm an advocate for the city of Des Moines and also do some economic development work for the Port of Olympia. And as you may be thinking, well, those aren't ferry communities. But to an earlier question of how do you build a winning consortium, make this relevant to enough people that things move in the legislature. I loved Representative Nance's discussion about the Mosquito Fleet Reauthorization Act of 2025. And Puget Sound obviously has the vast majority of population and legislative districts in Washington State. And many communities like Des Moines and Thurston County would be thrilled to be part of the Mosquito Fleet again. And I think if there is potential for funding a couple of pilot programs for 12 ferries and the like, which are relatively cheap. I mean, it's a few $1 million. But suddenly you get another 10 or so, or 10 or 12 legislative districts that may not be getting ferry service, but have that twinkle in the eye and think and hope of maybe in 10 years or maybe in 15 years, we too could be part of that Mosquito Fleet. I think you build a winning coalition and a lot of excitement for that. So good luck with your bill, and Thurston County and Des Moines and other communities would love to help move these things forward if possible.
So appreciate Des Moines, very strategically located near SeaTac Airport. Imagine from Vashon or from Bainbridge or Bremerton or Kingston or Whidbey taking a fast ferry to Des Moines, hopping a bus right to the airport, as opposed to the 5 bus lines that otherwise would take you there.
Yeah. The thought had not occurred. I'm joking. Who had their hand up? Okay, good. Okay, you guys.
We can do both.
Yeah.
We could.
Don't fight. Okay, go ahead, sir.
I'm Kerry Eskridge. I'm from the Oregon Island Chamber of Commerce. I want to again thank you all for your time. Very quick. Some of the things that I'm hearing that I'm really appreciating are from Jane, Denise, about ground transportation. Orcas has that issue. So we can get all the passengers we want to the ferry landing. It does nothing for the businesses in East Sound or the other population centers, really, if we can't get those folks there. Also, the distinction between communication on a daily and this more strategic, long-term reliability stuff, I think that's a huge issue. When I look at we actually create a schedule in our chamber office that's more readable for folks who aren't used to the ferry service. When you go to the schedule on the website, it's almost impossible to decipher unless you're in it, on a daily basis. The app is a lot better, but I'd like to see more kind of communication that you would come to expect, from not TikTok or Snapchat, but stuff that's a little bit more readable. And that's very different than reliability stuff. So I liked hearing the distinction between those two things. And then I would just like to acknowledge that for the islands, we're very resilient. So we're used to this kind of stuff. It's not, we used to have like a brigade that would take blankets down to the ferry landing for folks who got stranded and stuff like that. So, I think we can make it through a lot of stuff, but just kind of knowing what we're up against and what you guys are all doing for us, really meaningful.
I ran the Emergency Operations Center as a volunteer on Vashon for a little over 20 years. I just retired from that job. Took an enormous cut in pay. So I was building an exercise for all of our, we call them the disaster clubs. They're served, et cetera. And I assigned somebody to build some stories about what it would be like on Vashon if we had a blizzard, because actually there have been blizzards. We don't think of that so much in the Northwest. So the volunteer went to talk to some old timers on the island and couldn't come up with a story, because the answer was always, well, I just go out and I kill a chicken. I bring some extra wood into the house. Everybody was resilient. That's what made me think of this. There is a resilience there. But there are some people who obviously are completely helpless if the ferry isn't running. I'm a cardiac patient. If I miss a big procedure, it's like months to get back in the queue. Yeah. Anyway, sorry to be boring. Go ahead.
No, I really do appreciate you all spending the time on this Saturday to talk with us and hear us, and also share what you're doing, and for us to share what our ideas. One of the things that I think really resonated with me was the conversation about coalition building, and that really inspired me to reach out to Amy initially, being like, we can't do this alone. We have to reach out and collaborate and work with other community or like ferry impacted communities to do this work. So I think that part really resonated with me, and also the ground transportation part also really resonated with me. I think in Bremerton, where we're at, I live about 2 miles from the ferry dock, and it's always one of those things where, like, I guess I could drive my car down and park it, or I guess I could walk, but like 2 miles is kind of far to walk at 8 o'clock at night. And so it's just like always the logistics going on in my head about how can I, like, what does my day look like? What does my commute look like? How can I do this feasibly and cheaply? One of the things that I think I did want to comment is that, or kind of express, is this, I think that in Bremerton at least, there's this huge anxiety, as I'm sure that there are in other communities. I think that we especially feel this anxiety because our competitor isn't necessarily Vashon, or a competitor, but like, it's in Vashon, it's not San Juan Islands, it's Bainbridge. And so we're always competing, we always feel like we're competing with Bainbridge. Bainbridge is always the one that is highlighted and talked about, and they're the most regimentally run route. They are frequently on time, and the thing that we've been talking about is really centering equity in our conversation when we do talk about Bremerton, is that Bainbridge will always have a half-hour ferry, and Bremerton will always have an hour-long ferry. Like, no matter how you cut that, that's always how things are gonna happen. So equity for us personally looks like having maybe 3 boats between Bremerton and Seattle, and Bainbridge having 2 boats. And equality is just those 2 boats happening, and that's not necessarily happening right now. And to speak to the comment, if that was probably our responsibility if we did say that the Bremerton route's gonna be canceled, we didn't. This kind of came up, just to kind of bring this out, is that we heard from multiple different sources that there was a conversation happening where Chimacum was going to be put permanently on the Bremerton route. And so we reached out, and if that's not a part of the conversation, then I guess that's not a part of the conversation. But that's what we had heard from multiple different people who had talked to multiple different people. And we have a huge anxiety from the Bremerton community saying that, like, they're gonna cut the route because we can either drive around, we have the fast ferries, or Bainbridge, we just go to Bainbridge. The reality too is that even if I did take the Bainbridge ferry, I can't get back down to Bremerton easily. Like, there's no feasible way, there's no ground transportation. So when that happens, it's like, I don't know, like, what do I do? And I always share this story. When I was in grad school, I went to the Evans School at UW. And I always share the stories that my class ended at 8:30 and I would go to the ferry dock and the next boat wasn't until 10:30. And so I'd sit there on the ground and I would be fuming because I would see 2 boats leave going to Bainbridge and I wouldn't get home until midnight. And so I guess, like, sharing that anxiety with everybody about, like, that's what we feel every time. And one of the suggestions that I have is that the alternative too is the fast ferries. Fast ferries are fantastic. I love Kitsap Transit fast ferries. They've done such a great job for us. But one of the things that happens during, like, Mariners games is that they end at 5 o'clock. And who's also trying to go back to Bremerton? 5 o'clock. It's also the commuters. So the amount of times that I've sat at the ferry dock for like 2 hours waiting to go home after work is just like, or I take the slow ferry and my work paid for the fast ferry, so it's like, oh, okay, now I'm paying another $10 to go home. And so is there an incentive to work with Mariners, or is there an incentive to work with the Seahawks or these other sports teams to sponsor a ferry boat, offer a beer, offer popcorn, something, so that there's more incentive for people to take the Washington State Ferries back to Bremerton or Bainbridge or something. But that's kind of like what I wanted to share with you all, is that, like, we feel this anxiety too, and I think we're also worried about, like, we can just drive around, but a lot of us are putting wear and tears on our car going to and from Seattle. I often drove when I was in grad school to and from Seattle because it was like, I don't know if I have another option. Like, it's either that or come home at midnight. That's all I wanted to share. So thank you.
So what I'm hearing is communicating the anxiety, that it's a reality for, in fact, probably everybody in this room. But that's part of the storytelling, isn't it? That we need to share with the legislators. Because stress is a very unhealthy thing. You didn't notice that, did you?
Rick, I have one question that I wanted to throw out there, and I think John Facina might be able to speak to this a little bit. But in our FAC's interactions with WSF, and mostly with John and his shop, I mean, there is so much pressure on the bureaucracy, on your office, John, and are you guys right-sized? You know, we haven't talked at all. We've talked a lot about staffing on boats, but honestly, John, the number of interactions we've had where you're like, you explain to us, you've only got so many people, right? And we talk about procurement stuff and like, well, I got this, you know. And so, please don't forget whether or not the bureaucracy is right-sized, because we get very granular in our interactions as an FAC with WSF. And their struggles are real in terms of the number of human resources that they have to do their work. And so I just hope that's not being lost, because you guys need to be right-sized to do everything you're being asked to do. So anyway.
Thank you. I appreciate that. 2 things. One, WSF cannot cancel a route. We have no authority.
Didn't say you were going to. I don't think that we did. We just feel it like, if there was one route to be canceled, like, we were like, it would probably be ours, if we're being honest. And if WSF can't, then they can't. But like, there's a lot of conversations where, like, if this is it, like, there's always, like, I feel like we're always being treated as there's always another option.
I get it. I just want to say, only the legislature can add or cancel a route. They're not. In fact, they're still funding us. We're having to move it around. Like, they've made clear, as Senator Leas did Wednesday night, get Bremerton, get the triangle. So just, if you hear that, that's not happening. Councilmember Fuller, I really appreciate what you said. Sorry, I really appreciate what you said. I'm going to have a little bit of Senator Leas love for a minute. As you crew, so we're at 21 vessels right now. Our long-range plan says we should be at 26. So that's what the legislature is working. They funded 5. We're talking about how we're going to fund the next 11 we need and the timing for that. My colleagues, incidentally, were in this room all day Wednesday and Thursday. We had an executive team retreat of 12 of us with a facilitator in this room talking about this. And one of the things that Senator Leas and his crew constantly talk to us about is, if you're hiring all these more people, do you need more HR? If we're going to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, do you have people that Senator Leas, SB 5550 2 years ago, funded it for exactly that? And I appreciate that recognition, but it is, you know, I don't know that I've gone a week in the last 4 months when one of my team wasn't crying on Teams. It's a lot of pressure. We're not at a call center in Denver. We're like Washingtonians like you, and people come to work, and every day we feel like we're failing. And so I think the legislature understands there's definitely empathy, but there's also support to help us build back. I know you all, it's 90 degrees and you're waiting in line 2.5 hours to go home, or a boat cancels. I get that. And we really are trying to get better. As I said, we spent 2 days doing it. But you know, people need bridges in Yakima and roads in Spokane, and we're only going to be as big as we are. So that kind of empathy, not just for the crews, which you all are so great about, but also for the management. We're not purposely trying to hurt anybody. Justin laughs. Sometimes Justin would like to purposely hurt me, but that's a whole nother story from the past.
I like to do that behind closed doors.
And also just on the topic of equity, I think one of the things that I'm trying to be mindful of, I mean, even if we look around this room, there's not a lot of BIPOC representation, and we know that our ferry communities have diverse communities. And as we think about the mechanisms that ferry gets customer, rider, public feedback, I want to make sure that they are hearing from everybody. And that means the folks with medically fragile needs. It means the income constrained folks that have to live in a community because of housing. It means communities of color that may not use English as their first language to engage. So as we think about communication, with all due respect to all of you, I think the communication also is about the folks that aren't in this room and aren't engaged, and what does an income constrained person of color that's commuting need from ferries, and is it different than what other folks need? How do we make sure we're hearing that broad array of voices? And I think historically the legislature hasn't thought about that. We've thought about who shows up, we will address their needs, and I think we're trying to build an understanding. There are a lot of people who aren't showing up for very legitimate reasons, and we need to make sure that their needs are also being addressed by what we're doing. So I hope you'll have some patience in that as well, that we want John to listen to you and to be hearing from the folks who aren't able to be here as well.
Okay. This is the last question, folks.
Okay. I want to give big kudos to the education route that you outlined. When Bremerton Ferry Coalition hosted a ferry summit 2 years ago, I participated in one of the breakout sessions, and it was specifically about recruiting, about maintaining employees and how do we get them. And one of our strongest, we had a whole sheet of here's what it would take to make a sustainable crew. And one of the big things we talked about was how do we make it attractive at the lower level so that children grow up again believing that this is a viable career and believing that they can actually achieve it. So that whether or not you took it from our summit, we were talking about it a couple of years ago, and it's amazing to see it manifested. Because we were like, look, somebody's got to be able to pay to get this kind of training, and nobody can afford to take 2 years off from work to pay to get trained. So what's the solution? And we were working with union members and Olympic College and talking about exactly the route that you put together. So that's why I applauded when you were talking. Just, it's really incredible to see that kind of agility and that kind of responsiveness, and to feel like that idea was present a couple years ago and you turned it into reality. So thank you for your work on that.
Well, thank you. See, just one thing very quickly, because this was a question, but again, going back to the legislature and the funding and the governor's office, and shortly after the governor announced that he was not going to run again, I ran into him somewhere. He goes, Dan, what do we need next? And I said, well, we need to fund the apprentice programs that we created. And so now we have scholarships to these apprentice programs. They're expensive. They're very, very expensive. And now we have funding for, I want to say, over the course of the next biennium, 24 seats. And so it's really about funding, but it's about the outreach, and it's about keeping it all going. But the most important takeaway from my perspective as the head of the union that runs, the masters, mates, and pilots, and the guys that are upstairs in the pilot house, is that it is a pipeline from the bottom to the top. And I just deal with the top part, but it's the pipeline that matters. And so we have to dig deep. We have to go out. It's Seattle Maritime, Seattle Central College, the MyTags. Actually, MyTags is part of an M&P trust. We own that school. And so, I shouldn't say we own it, it's a trust. But at any rate, it's a multifaceted thing. You cannot look in one place for this education. You have to use every single piece of it that's available and leverage what you have to get the broadest outreach that you can.
Sorry, one interesting data point, there are deep racial disproportionalities in access to swim lessons by kids. And so I grew up in a white community. I went to swim practice, swim lessons all growing up. There's measurable data to show that our Latino and Black communities do not have that access. And this is one of those precursor things that is, puts people on a track or not in a maritime career. So we need to get systems level even deeper to say, how are we closing these pathways when a kid is 5 and 6, not just when they get to middle high school?
And I would love to add that the ferry appreciation rights came out of that conversation about how to make the pipeline happen. And we thought, well, if we are on ferries with signs saying, we really appreciate our ferry crew, children may see the signs and be like, oh my gosh, these people think that these crew members are really amazing and worth showing up for and bringing them treats and snacks, And so it was a conscious effort of, one, we need to make our Bremerton route attractive so that we get crew who want to serve on it, but two, we want riders to see this is viable. So it came directly out of that conversation about the pipeline.
And I think one of our ideas for our zines was going to be highlighting crew members and different crew positions to explain that a little bit more too for that other education piece.
So we'll get back to you when we write that zine about what does it take to become a mate. We'll make a zine about that so that people can circulate it and kids can read about that.
My cards are on the table.
Brilliant.
There.
Completely.
And the office number was also.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So, thank you everyone for this morning. The goal was to have a conversation, and I'd like to think that we did that. There wasn't a lot of, if any, canned speech making here. This was something where I hope you all got to say your piece, and you all got to say your piece. And I think the most important aspect of dialogue, or at least equally important aspect of dialogue, is listening. And that's what I observed today. Somebody trying to help people, sort of glue this together. I watched a lot of people really listening and hearing, because listening and hearing are two different things. So thank you for that. Thank you. Lunch is on its way, or what's the deal?
Yeah, so there's a couple, we'll just do
I need to
housekeeping.
mention one more thing, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
So this is me handing Amy these sheets that you did, because she promises she will scan them and send them to all of the panelists.
Awesome.
Okay?
Yes, thank you. So, thank you. Can we give a round of applause? Of course, be continuing these conversations in all of our communities at length. We do have lunch if you order lunch, or if you need to go out and grab lunch. We'll take about 20 minutes right now, and then we are going to bring up Peter to talk about the future of our marine highways and kind of continue the discussion of alternative solutions, because that's one of the things that we're really focused on is alternative solutions and long-term solutions. Everyone is welcome to stay for lunch, of course, and for our keynote, we'll start in about 15 or 20 minutes. And there was one more piece of housekeeping that I had. Well, it wasn't that important then. All right, well, thank you, everyone, thank you.
Hey, Ian, good job today.
Everyone's